Today, we kick off with one of the giants of the national and local newspaper and digital news worlds, Gannett. We refer to Gannett now as legacy, but I'm old enough to remember when USA Today launched in 1982. It was the first national newspaper, and it not only looked and felt different from other newspapers in the field, but it was sold on the streets in boxes that looked like TV. It defined disruptor brands in the 1980s. Fast forward to 2021, and the company is on a major push to drive subscription access, particularly to digital products, to both the main news content as well as a series of separate products that it's been launching. What's of special interest here is the way in which the company is using artificial intelligence to bring customer acquisition and reader conversion to a more precise and scientific level. But they're also using AI in even more advanced ways to improve the overall user experience, to pump up retention, which is so critical to this more paid media model, but even to help craft content for local markets. Yeah, this is going to be really interesting. So I want to welcome Kris Barton, who's the Chief Product Officer at Gannett. He's going to explain how this is working and what the company is learning from artificial brains. And Kris knows his way around both journalism and tech. He came to Gannett several years ago after a long stint running product for Reach Local. But previously to that, he'd been at the software firm Nero, and years ago at Microsoft. Kris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for doing this. Kris is going to kick us off by sort of walking us through a small deck, the ways in which AI is driving his subscription machine, and then I'm going to pop in and we're going to have a conversation about it. So, Kris, I'm going to let you take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'll go ahead and just bring up my screen here. So, yeah, very excited to share a little bit about what we're doing at Gannett and how we're using AI, just as you mentioned, Steve, to really facilitate subscription growth. I won't geek out too much. I know our audience isn't really a bunch of engineers, but I do think it's quick to just spend 30 seconds understanding the basics of how AI works. And this is obviously at a very high level, but there's a few components that are important to understand, because as we ask questions and as we talk about AI going forward and understand how it can help us as a technology, it's important to understand what it really does and what it doesn't do. So let me just explain these sort of three parts that are here. In the upper left-hand corner, we've got this concept of models. And in order to create a model, the model is really, think of it as the problem and the technology framework that you're going to use to answer a question. And so you can see some development tools that are listed there. I'm not here to be a salesperson for any kind of development tool, but there are many to choose from. Many of these and most of these are open source. There are others that can be licensed or purchased, but these are just tools, frameworks to think about the problem that you want to solve. Where the really hard work lies is in deciding what you want to solve, what question you want to answer. And that's the basics of what you'd call your model. Then feeding into that, you have the bottom of this chart, which is really a key element, and that is understanding what data sources do you have that are going to feed and help inform the question that you're asking. And depending on who you are, what kind of space you're in, how long you've been doing business, you might have a lot or a little of this. Some of this may be proprietary data that you want to feed in, or it may be data that you want to acquire and partner with other places to get and feed. And that ultimately creates the foundation of the model. The model then lives in a runtime, which is in the upper right-hand corner there, and it's basically learning, it's executing, it's trying to work around the framework that's been set and the question that's been asked in the model, using the data to inform it. Now, what happens on an ongoing basis is training and more data. So this becomes a loop where over time, as the model gets smarter, as it starts to figure things out, it can be informed with more data sources and training, where you're teaching the model, kind of coaching it, what you want it to look for, what you want it to find. And so that's the basics of how artificial intelligence works. And I think it's important always to start there. And no matter where you are in an organization, to have a basic understanding of AI doesn't just walk in and figure things out for you. You ultimately have to decide what questions you're trying to ask, and you have to use the right data and training to inform it to get to answers in those questions. And so that's sort of our foundation as we think about AI. And For us at Gannett, we've thought about it in a few different ways, and I wanted to highlight 3 today. There's many we could talk about, but sort of the from to side of this. I think we've all are familiar with the left-hand side of we have to personalize the experiences that we deliver. We know that's critical. We also know that there's this concept of a conversion funnel where you bring people in and you walk them down a funnel of conversion to get them to do desired activity. And in our case, that might be signing up for a subscription, or it could be something like registering for an account, or even engaging with an ad or things like that. And then the third element that's sort of from is local content. We all know that that's important. When something feels like it's relevant to people, and local is an element of relevancy, consumers engage more with it. And so those were all sort of standard problems that have existed for a while that we've all been working on. But really what AI is allowing us to do is shift to the right-hand side here. And you can see what some of these things are. And in the next couple slides, I just want to explain each one of these quickly. So let's start with this personalization, going from personalization to intelligent UX. Well, what is that? Intelligent UX really is thinking about not just a set of a few variables or a few modules that can be customized. That would be personalization, but really thinking about the totality of the possible combinations that can be exposed to a user. And so you think about different things. I've, again, just listed a few here, but business goals, personal preferences they might have, environmental factors, might be key news events or things that are going on in their world. It could also be things like what type of device they're on or what time of day it is. And then value proposition being another key element there. And when you think about intelligent UX and what it does is it really is saying, how do we take all those different elements and realize it's not about optimizing for one, but it's about finding the right combination across all of them. And so AI allows us to consider these different variables, and there can be many, many of them at any given moment that we're trying to optimize for the best experience. And that best experience might be driving more engagement. It might be driving a business goal. It might be optimizing for efficiency and time. There could be different things that we're ultimately trying to do. But this is really where AI shines, because it allows us to say, here are the things we're trying to solve for. We can define those concretely. We can feed in the data, and we can train the model towards different outcomes that we're looking for. And that's really one of the opportunities and one way that we're using AI today. Second way, I talked about a conversion funnel being a sort of something that we're all familiar with, something that we do. But really, as we think forward, it's less about a conversion funnel. That really is a one-time event that we're looking for. And it's about what I would call flywheel growth. And so how do we define ongoing behaviors that reinforce each other for good to drive better outcomes for both our consumers and for the business? And so let me give you an example here. As you think about flywheel growth, you might think of different pillars. For us, there are things like we want to attract consumers into our ecosystem. We want to engage them and we want to delight them, which hopefully is going to drive some business outcome that we're looking for. And so what might that be? Let's take a simple example. So attract might be they come in, they see comments they want to interact with, and it tells them that they can create an account to view comments. We've all done this before and seen this before. There's nothing really novel about this. So we expose that message to them. As they create the account, we engage them by offering and showing up a value proposition of what they're going to get for doing that action. So we tell them about that. We might then also show them other types of actions, things like, hey, you see an autoplay video. If you don't want to see this, here's another value, another thing that you can do that will remove that and also drive more value for you as a consumer. And again, they then might decide to take that next step and subscribe. Again, we're going to talk about value proposition and what they're going to get for subscribing. But then what we want to do is we want to reinforce that behavior by telling them that it happened and close that loop and drive them to the next activity. And so the difference, again, between a conversion funnel and a flywheel is that it never stops. There's always a next action, a next step, trying to engage them more, trying to reinforce the behavior so that they see that it's working. And again, AI becomes key here because every user journey is not the same. And so trying to map and control those individually becomes almost impossible. Whereas if you use AI, we can control these flows and drive to the best outcomes in that time for that consumer. The last thing I want to just quickly highlight on is natural language generation. And so NLG, the acronym that's used here. And so what this is ultimately using machines and artificial intelligence to use data sources to help augment and create content that's used and read by consumers. And so at Gannett, we've been doing this for a little while. And one of the things that we struggled with was, do we need to disclose, if this is machine written versus human written? And what role does it play in that ecosystem? Does it replace journalists, or does it augment them? What does it do? So we were sort of struggling with that question, trying to figure it out. So as we do with all of these types of activities, we test, and see what works, what doesn't, and let ultimately behavior tell us what the right answer is. So we did exactly that. And the way we use natural language generation, you kind of see a flow here, but we ultimately, journalists write templates that feeds into an authoring system, which creates article variants. And then we have a distribution tool that routes it to the right location. For us, that's local markets. It may be even national distribution channels. And then it can be managed in our CMS, our content management system, to be overridden, or when to be published, and when to be used or not used. So what does that translate to in terms of value? What would a consumer see in something like this? Here's a couple examples of things that were done fairly recently, a little while ago, but not too long ago. So you can kind of see examples. So one was census, US Census data. We knew when that came out, 2020 US Census data, we wanted to immediately use it. And so we had templates built and content ultimately created, these shells of content. And within 3 hours of that data being published, we were able to upload it into our system. And then using the automation that we had already put in place, deliver articles with insights that were automatically already fine-tuned to show that data. So it was a very powerful use where across our entire network, within 3 hours of something being published, our entire network was using the data, creating and generating hyper-local content. Likewise, on the right-hand side, you can see another example of hurricane coverage that was used. And we were able to take a generic article and hyper-localize it for our audience. So even though consumers were in the Clarion Ledger here in Jackson, Mississippi, and reading content, we were able to hyper-localize where they were as they were reading it to make it super relevant for them, not just for the entire, one single article for everyone, but they could see where it was in relation to them. And so these are ways where we can use natural language generation to ultimately create better experiences. And again, this AI, this smart engines that we're using, that we're creating, ultimately help drive conversion. They drive better experiences, more engagement, which ultimately results in more subscriptions. And that's the goal of what we're trying to do. So those are a few of the things that we are currently working on. And we're never done, but gives you a little taste of some of the things how we're using this technology to drive better experiences and subscriptions.
Thank you, Kris. Let's drill into the details a little bit with you. Before we do, I want to remind everybody that we want your interactivity. We want your questions. So if you have questions of Kris, either use the hand raise icon in your Zoom interface, or you can type the question into the chat window and I'll ask it for you. First of all, I want to make sure we understand what the paid media product mix is for USA Today and Gannett. What are the products that you're pushing people in towards more direct paid relationships in?
Yeah, so great question. So we have, when we talk about paid subscription products, just make sure I'm answering that right, we have a handful. So we have our local news sites. So we have several hundred local news brands that we're driving subscriptions into. We have our USA Today, which is our national news brand, is also a product now that we're driving subscriptions into. That's a fairly recent shift for us. And then we've launched other ancillary products as well. We have a Sports Plus, a product offering that we've recently launched that we're driving people into, a crosswords app and experience, and many, many more. But we're really trying to create an ecosystem of news, information, games, and experiences that we can drive consumers into.
Now, for the news products, USA Today and the local products, are you using a metered paywall as well? Is that part of the experience? And I'm curious, does the AI fit into the metering?
Yes. So yes, we are. We're using a metered paywall, and part of the AI feeds not only the rules for when and what the paywalls are set at for the users, but also in some situations we may not even show a paywall because we've ultimately determined that this user, based on their behavior, is never going to buy. They're never going to be a subscriber, and so we're going to create the best experience for them, understanding that's the case.
So the AI is actually driving a highly personalized and individuated experience of use of the paywall, which I mean, I think that's critical, because this gets us far beyond those, 7, 10, 12 exposure rules that we were using for metering.
That's absolutely right. And I think you hit on a key point there of, the flow, the sort of transition of everything we're doing is that you go from people just deciding what to do to rules-based. Then you get into AI, which it can be situation-based and consumer-based.
So let's dig into the infrastructure of all of this and the actual nuts and bolts of putting it together. So tell us a little bit about the timeline in how you built this, how long it took from inception to execution.
Yeah, sure. So I will tell you too, confession here, in that, especially in my role as Chief Product Officer, I never feel like we're done, right? And so we'll never be done. It's always, what's the next best improvement we can do? But we were able to leverage. We have all of our sites, all of our network was monetized primarily before through advertising, and so we had already a pretty sophisticated ad tech infrastructure around identifying cohorts, user segments, and delivering ads, targeted ads to those users. So we were able to build on top of that. And one of the things that also drove this and created urgency and opportunity for us is, as we're all aware in the industry, Google announced, Apple did it a while ago, but Google announced that there'd be removal of third-party cookies in the Chrome browser. And so because of that, we knew that some of these third-party sources and technologies for leveraging how we identify users, especially if they're new to our sites, were going away or we're going to change. And so we knew we had to build on something and create something that would ultimately stand the test of time and help us transition into this new model. And so for us, we built on top of that. We deploy a lot of tactics such as first-party data collection with data collection surveys to collect information about users, even if they're not registered or subscribed with us. But ultimately, we're trying to get people to go from an anonymous state to a known state to a registered state to a subscribed state. We're trying to work them through that, and along the way, find value, create a flywheel where there's always the next step of something better.
Yeah, and I think you're sort of anticipating my next question here. Maybe you even answered it, which is about data gathering. Now, you mentioned that one of the functions of building the AI machine is that assessing the data that you have and how best to use it. But does the AI also change your data gathering strategy? Are you understanding what the machine needs and what it wants and what it can make best use of? Has it actually changed the ways in which, where, and from whom you're gathering data?
Yeah, and I would rephrase it slightly to agree, and I would say that the questions that we're trying to answer and the business problems we're trying to answer focus on the data that we're collecting. The AI itself is a tool. It's an infrastructure that just enables that action to happen. But ultimately, as you shift from trying to drive a subscription instead of trying to monetize just through advertising, the questions, the data sets you want, the motivations for what are going to drive that behavior are different. So that's the data collection you want to focus on. And for us, that's exactly the types of things that we've done. So we are trying to focus on what are the actions, the user behaviors actions that are going to drive a consumer to create an account, to register with us. That's one set of problems that we're focused on. The other one is around, like I said before, is around data collection, where can we learn first party, maybe through lightweight interactions, where as the customer is reading an article and engaging with an article, can we prompt little quick questions where we can get them to tell us a little bit about themselves, and we can use that to reward them for giving that information by giving a better experience. And now we have a trust relationship, which will drive ultimately to a registration or subscription as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to sort of underscore that point because I think it's so relevant now, and maybe it's obvious, but the ways in which AI is helping you solve for third-party cookies is helping you make more intelligent use of the first-party relationship that you have, so that you're less reliant on the disappearing at any time third-party cookie infrastructure.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And part of that is because with AI, it's not just a one rule and done where, hey, if they do this, do that. You can have infinite rules where someone comes in, they're doing something. If they do this, do this. If they do that, do that. It can learn and take them down a decision tree where you need actually less information about them to start to go down a more meaningful model of interaction. So that's exactly.
Yeah, and I think that part is really key, is that you don't need as much, and you can make much more use of the first party relationship and touch points that you've got. What changes need to be done internally? I mean, you mentioned a bunch of different places where you're seeing AI done, including all the way down to the editorial level. So tell us a little bit about what sort of staff or training changes you've had to make in order to use the machine in its best ways.
Yeah, so I would say too, it's still a work in progress for us. I don't by any means mean to imply that we've got everything figured out and that we don't ever have any challenges. But I do with our editorial and newsrooms. Yes, there's work in engaging, but our newsrooms, and it starts with our leadership, has been so supportive of using this technology and seeing it not as a threat, but as a complement to doing our jobs better. And that has been key. Having the right people who are on board from the get-go of this is going to help us, not hurt us. And so that's been really, really key. And as we, some of the things that we've been focused on is, we do look at how are some of the ways we look at our newsroom, obviously, as our customer, just like our end customer, of how can we make their jobs easier? How can we delight them with experiences? And so we're constantly looking for, ways that we can automate the things they don't like, that they spend a lot of time on that aren't value adds. One of the things that we had to do as well was some of the partnerships that we had in place, even third parties, were partnerships that were created because they did digital and print very well. And so it was nice because we could sort of have this dual ecosystem. But the reality was they didn't do AI very well, a lot of them. And so, and it did make us and force us to say, we have to reevaluate some of the partnerships we have as well, and make sure that they're really aligned with the ultimate goals that we're trying to get to, not holding us into some of the legacy behaviors because it was a matter of convenience previously.
I'm really interested in the user experience too, and because we know that the other piece of driving subscription is retention is going to be critical to everybody. So enhancing the experience is going to be a really important piece of this. Now, on a local level, especially when you're localizing content, the way you illustrated, what user metrics and behaviors are being impacted by that? What are you after there? And what is key to sort of, because we're all talking a lot about the decline of local media and the need to sort of pull people back and get them to understand there are organizations like Gannett that continue to do this in a robust way, and it's a value to them. So that experience is really important on a lot of levels. So I'm curious about what you're seeing on the local level into how these AI-driven content pieces drive specific metrics or behaviors.
Yeah, so we are ultimately looking at engagement metrics. So monthly active, daily active, repeat visits, time on site. We're looking at those core engagement metrics. And what we see is, can we use AI content, or can we use that flywheel effect to get more value-added touch points where we're seeing that, hey, they did one of these actions that are meaningful actions. And so this is also where, for me at least, my background as well is also in software as a service and some of these other behaviors. This is where I think there's a beauty of these things coming together and these ecosystems coming together, where it's the same metrics that you're ultimately thinking about. You're thinking of how often are people logging into the system? Are they doing value-added actions in the system? Do we see those happening? And that changes the type of analytics you need to look at too. It's not just page views, it's looking at interactions with elements of the interface. Are you seeing those interactions? And so that means some retooling around the analytics tool sets and things that you've got to do to be able to measure those differently. And we definitely see that. One of the examples, even just simple, like local content, if we can do personal local content to a user, we see a 30% engagement. If we can expose, even though they haven't asked for it, if we can expose that to them, we'll see a 30% engagement with that content to them. So we see these little elements, these little nuggets that we'll look for, and we say, okay, that was a good interaction. How can we drive more of those?
And my next question, as you were going through these slides again, and I realized that my next question might be obsolete, and that might be an important discussion point. I'm curious, are you seeing, are there particular subscription prompts? You mentioned a whole bunch, no ads, autoplay, a whole series of possibilities, being able to comment on an article. And traditionally, I would ask, are there particular real drivers of conversion that you're seeing? Because everybody wants to know those. I'm wondering if AI actually makes that question obsolete. It doesn't matter. As long as you're putting a menu of possibilities there and giving people a lot of options, the AI will personalize it.
Yeah, I think that's partially true, for sure. What I see more of though is it's the right combination of things that drive the behavior. So there might be 10 things that meaningfully drive conversion, but for you, it might be 3 of those things 5 times each that actually is the key mix. And for me, it might be 5 of the things 1 time each, but it's those different combos of the things working together. That's where we see the magic of making it contextual, time relevant to whatever you're doing, but getting the right mixture of those things together ultimately is where AI really strives.
So my wrap question has to do with the future. Now, is this technology not only satisfying a whole series of particular present goals, is AI helping you to imagine new product? Are you starting to see needs, or does it put you in a position where you can analyze the data, analyze your audience, and imagine, and also just the technical capabilities that AI makes possible, that high level of hyper-personalization? Are you now starting to imagine new products that you can offer because of this technology?
Yes, for sure. And I would say it is doing 2 things at the end of the day. One is it lets us see there's more utility in our current base of products than maybe we thought there was, because you can do a little bit more with them. But on the other side, it is allowing us to think of new opportunities, new spaces. One is because we can see the behavior trends of the users themselves. They're telling us, if we look in that data, we can see more what they're actually asking for, because we see hints of behavior that weren't as fixed before. They're a little more freeform. Yeah. So that's one side where we're seeing it. The other side is where we see certain behavior. We'll see adjacent markets or adjacent opportunities where there might be data sets that would actually really fit well together. And so we can see consumption behaviors, or we can see content interests emerge from those other behaviors. So it can make it strategic to enter into that space, just so we have the data sets we can share with those 2 things together. So those are a couple of ways how we're thinking about AI and how it's changing us right now.
Well, Kris, I hope that we can have you back in 6 months at our next publishing summit to report on the actual results, because a lot of these programs are really still quite new. Right. But Kris Barton of Gannett, thank you so much. This was really interesting.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.